So how's everybody doing today? This has been an amazing series of events. I just want to say, y'all feeling energized? Yeah? All right. As a musician, artist, and writer, one of the things that really inspires me is conferences like this. I've tended to find, when you're dealing with, say, for example, artists don't know about science, scientists don't know about art, and musicians maybe don't know about anything. I don't know. You got to always figure, how do we balance between all of these different inputs and outputs in the culture? So what I wanted to do today was a non-linear exploration of some of the issues that I think might give everybody a little bit of a palate cleanser after a very heavy day of heavy lifting of the imagination. So by way of beginning this, I first and foremost want to thank the two musicians who are joining me, Chereth and Cello Joe, two wonderful Bay Area musicians. Can we give them a little love? Just like, you know. All right, and if we can get my iPad up and running as well, we're going to just call up that screen. All right, and okay, I will wait. All right, so what I want to do today is give you guys a little bit of a tour of the hard drive of a creative musician. So tonight, we're going to do part 2 to this. But first and foremost, let me just show you guys one thing. This is Washington, D.C. a little while ago. It's me DJing in front of about 1 million people. That's bigger than the Trump administration, by the way, inauguration. And this is Earth Day. And so what ended up happening is we had a tremendous amount of musicians and creatives come together to celebrate this idea of how arts can actually uplift some of the narrative about climate change. And it was a powerful day. Groups like The Roots, The Flaming Lips, myself, and so on, we all played material that was meant to be a homage to the concept of Earth Day. So for me, at least, I'm from Washington, D.C., and I grew up near DuPont Circle, if anybody knows D.C. And one of the things that always has inspired me was the sense that D.C. was this strange conglomeration of different cultural backdrops. There was a kind of a crystallization of some of the twisted and strange paradoxes of Americana. When I was growing up, we had Ronald Reagan on one screen and, Marion Barry on the other. I don't know if anybody remembers those. But it was, the 80s were wild, So what I want to do today is break down what happens with sampling and the arts, because collage is how we pull together these unexpected associative logic of breaking through different kinds of, for lack of a better word, blocks. So what you're seeing behind me is a very simple phrase where it says, every book you've ever read is just a different combination of 26 letters. Now let that sink in for a moment. So if 26 letters can generate a tremendous amount of literature, of the arts, we're looking at not just how they reframe science, because science is just a component of that, but above all, the semantics of creativity, how we think about the language of creativity. So for me at least, DJing is not just about music, it's about information. And when we start thinking about a generation that's grown up on digital media, one of the things that really, really comes home to roost is we have to really reframe and think about the notions that, first and foremost, there's a collision going on between code and culture. So I'm going to go to this gentleman with Moore's Law of Computing, and he's a gentleman who's really come up with a whole bunch of narrative issues around how we look at the notion that computational power and its collision with culture has come home to roost in, yes, the phone. So communication and networks. These are things that inspire me quite a bit. And this gentleman here is generally a major influence in my work, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. We did a series of conversations a little while ago, and I got him to wear a hip-hop hat, by the way. And we ended up having a series of discussions about what happened with the web, because it was invented as an open source initiative at CERN in Switzerland. If he had done that in a private corporate context, all of the web would, as we know, would have been locked down. And you have to imagine that because it was part of a commons of scientists exchanging information and coming up with new approaches to think about indexing all the data that they were generating with their experiments, the world as we know it will be a different place. So, for me at least, that is a place where the imagination and geography have collided to the betterment of everyone. This is my most recent book. I did a book called The Imaginary App recently with MIT Press, and I've been publishing about art and technology for quite a while. And for the book, I wanted to come up with a mega mix about the way apps had changed creativity. So what you're going to be seeing and hearing in a little bit is kind of a collision between some of those issues that I just mentioned, Moore's Law of Computing, and above all, this notion that code and culture and the unexpected rise of creativity generates radically unexpected results. For example, this is Hedy Lamarr. You may or may not know her, but she's generally considered to be the inventor of Wi-Fi as we know it, and 4G LTE. As a woman during World War II, she was not necessarily given the credit, and eventually Qualcomm ended up getting a lot of the patents and many other major corporations, but she hung out with artists like George Antheil, who's a renowned composer, who wrote a very famous piece of work called Ballet Mécanique. So they would be hanging out in a studio, listening to crazy avant-garde music, and she would be doing sketches of, I don't know, remote-controlled torpedoes. And so when you start thinking about this idea of the wireless imagination, the spectrum that we all use as part of our everyday, now wireless culture, it's kind of fascinating that she's a hidden dimension of some of the discourse. So another person that's a big inspiration for me, and I dedicated the first chapter of my book to her because I thought it was really fascinating that if you mention it, it's one of the most important inventions of the last century, but she's not as well known as she should be. Another person who I want to sort of dedicate this discussion to is this gentleman, Alan Turing, and this is a 3D volume printed sculpture of him. He died tragically, basically because of discrimination against gays at that time, and he invented basically the modern computer as we know it. Towards the end of his life, he wrote a series of essays that inspired me as a composer, and I worked with an artist named Greg Niermeyer to come up, who's at Berkeley here in California, to come up with a kind of a sonic, for lack of a better word, a sonic interpretation of some of the ideas of his codes. So this is what the installation looked like, and this is what Z came in Germany. And we took his equations and assigned them to color palettes and then used that to generate musical tone. So this is what an exhibition of that kind of context would look like if you walk into a museum of the near future. So he also wrote an essay called Morphogenesis that we took those equations and used those to generate music. And he felt that the micro and the macro, whether it be from the smallest particles of string theory on up to the particles that make up, for lack of a better word, strings and their relationship to various quantum physics relationships, on up to the macro level of literally the galactic and the universal concepts of how the fabric of space-time is governed. So let's show you this one image of our galaxy. We'll break it down to a storm that just happened recently. You can see this is the same form. So biomorphogenic equations, and then one more. And you can easily see something that one of the most profound computer scientists of the 20th century was able to leave as a legacy, this idea of pattern recognition. So let's think about that in terms of what you all have been talking about today. And I know it's kind of harsh to bring this guy up, but it's important, and even though I can't begin to believe that this person is our president, it still is irrelevant. So here we go, Donald Trump. He says the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make the US manufacturing non-competitive. And okay, that is Donald Trump. Where to begin? So here we are in the 21st century. We're at the peak of civilization as we know it. And let's go back to one of the earliest, this is from about 40,000 years ago. And I want to use a phrase to get as a remix out of this Donald Trump kind of madness. There's a very famous phrase where you simply say, the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone. It ended because people's imaginations changed. And this is one of the earliest cave paintings. It's off the coast of Cantabria in Spain. It's about 40,000 years. It's about 7,000 years older than the Chauvet caves in France. And it's people leaving their fingerprints on the wall. And what's powerful about this is that it was meant to tell a story with gestures, with movement. And those kind of stories changed the way human beings related to the environment. So 12,000 years ago, people began to get out of the hunter-gatherer idea of living and moved into the urban context where we created cities. We started farming. We became more sedentary. And as we move into the 21st century, these are things that are still inhabiting the basic social fabric of the way we think and live. So the remix here is that the world as we know it is always based on fragments. So I want to go from there to Antarctica. Now, a little while ago, I took a studio to Antarctica and went to several of the main ice fields. And the idea was to do what I call acoustic portraits of ice. This is me near the Ross Sea ice shelf, if anyone knows that region. And one of the most powerful things that inspired me was this sense of geologic time. You see those huge ripples, and I'll just zoom in here. You can see that that's the ice shelf caving in on itself and scouring an entire mountain, carving away the actual sort of geologic sensibility of the consistency of the landscape. Now, if you sort of zoom out from there, you can see this is a macro level event. And one of the things that really struck me was the stunning beauty. When I got back to New York and I was showing various friends photographs, what was powerful is that they couldn't get the sense of scale. So this is me hanging out with a whole bunch of penguins, which you shouldn't do, by the way, and doing photography and then trying to figure out, boom, the scale. So they couldn't really get a sense until they saw a person in the landscape. So what I'm going to do is walk you through, this is what you call hexagonal form. It's ice. It's a basic distillation of water under certain temperatures. But you see a variation going on here. It's the same pattern. We're going back to Alan Turing here, morphogenesis. Same pattern, folding in on itself, hexagonal morphology, and so on and so on. But I'm here as a DJ and artist, so let's take it to hip-hop. This is Iceberg Slim. Now, black people, we love ice. You got Ice Cube, Ice T. If you got the white guy, you got Vanilla Ice, And in the 60s, he became a foundation of a lot of how we thought about hip-hop. He's California, not too many icebergs in California, right? And so the fun part is that you have this idea of the poetics and the science. And this is what I ended up doing with certain data. This is what you call data sonification. And the piece you're about to hear is based on the equations generated by this gentleman, who you're going to see in a moment, named Johannes Kepler. I'm going to play one piece. It's called ice sonification. And this is based on his equations from 1611. He was on his way home in the middle of a snowstorm, and basically a geometric piece of ice landed on his sleeve, and he was stunned by the geometric precision in nature. And he said, he went home and tried to break it down into equations. And so this essentially are those equations. And so you guys ready? We're going to do a quick scenario here. All right. So for me, at least, the fun part of working with everybody is that this is a conversation between instruments. You're going to be seeing me manipulating a video piece and some of the algorithms taken from Johannes Kepler and the music that I composed as a homage to the Antarctic landscape of ice. So here we go. Thank you. So the beauty of that was turning essentially these kind of ice figures into how we think about geometry, which actually, if you go back to ancient Greece, there's a tremendous amount of relationship between geometry, math, and music. But then we update that with software like MaxMSP and be able to do a data sonification. So what you were hearing was literally those Johannes Kepler equations about the geometry of ice put into sound. So this next piece is called Check Your Math. And one of the things about global warming is that we have to really start thinking about different kinds of literature, different kinds of numeracy. And above all, how we reframe that discussion to go past this kind of myopia that Trump seems to have triggered in various bitter, crazy lunatics throughout the troll community. It's like we have the comment section on YouTube as president here. But so what I want to figure out is this next piece is based on a data set that I used to come up with a relationship not only to how we looked at climate change from the viewpoint of math, but above all, its relationship to, these are some of the data I worked with Dartmouth's Cold Regions Research Labs, and basically took that and did what you call algorithmic transcription, pulled it into this, and then used that to generate the electronics you're just about to hear. So here's weather made into hip hop. And I want you guys to think about this, not just as the viewpoint of how we look at STEM or STEAM, but from the viewpoint of it should be accessible and it should be able to communicate and think about the art of expressivity. And sometimes scientists will get caught up with data, but try explaining anything with data to Trump. I mean, it's really a very existential and insane moment that you have people like that. So I'm going to just do one last protocol, and then we're going to go to the next song. So many of us are aware of the founding myths of Western civilization. This is Prometheus being punished by the god Zeus. And what's fascinating about this is that Prometheus gave humanity fire, the idea of illuminating the darkness, and above all, being able to use new tools to create the new illumination, literally all puns intended. But as part of that bargain, he was betrayed and had all these issues, and Zeus completely punished him with this idea of a bird coming down to devour his liver every day as a sort of eternal recurrence. It's like watching Trump on CNN or something, So one of the other characters that came out of this is Pandora. And she was made as a gift out of the earth and water, and given as a gift to humanity to try and create a sense of enlightenment. And even her name, Pandora, means the pan, same word as Pangea, and other kinds of pan, global. And so the fun part about this is that she was given a box, and the god said, "Don't open this box." And curiosity does what it does. And next thing you know, she opens the box, and everything, every Malese and crazy creature flies out. Probably Trump was flying out of there as well. And next thing you know, humanity is plagued by all these problems and issues. Except one small creature remained at the bottom of the box, and that was hope. So the Greeks used this as a foundation to think about when curiosity and illumination are too bright, too intense, and then things that unexpected issues happen. So the myth of Pandora's box is a very powerful and potent cautionary tale, but also there's hope at the end. So this last piece is called Check Your Math, and like I said earlier, it's based on the data sets I used to generate a book project. And by the way, everything I'm talking about is open source, so if you're so inclined, you can feel free to remix the ice. And basically, it went to a project called the Book of Ice. All right, it's cropped, but I will. And it's gone to various museums and exhibitions. This is one where Robert Redford hosted it at Sundance, for example. And we had loops of different kinds of ice melting throughout the exhibition. And you walked into the room, and it made a composition of the different kinds of water and ice melting. So again, art. So, you guys ready? I'm going to open up an app I made and just do a quick demo, because these are a conversation between tools. Violin and cello have had centuries of tuning systems available, and software, on the other hand, changes every day, all the time. So say, for example, I can call up anything from SoundCloud, Google Music, Spotify, iTunes, and so on. This is an app I developed myself with a small team. It's called DJ Spooky, and it lets you just pull up anything from your iTunes, and I'll just show you.
J. Brown. 1, 2, 3,
It's pretty addictive. I'll leave it at that. So you're going to be hearing live remixing and sampling later tonight. But basically what we're going to do now is walk you guys through this one piece called Check Your Math. And I'm going to do an acoustic version first. So if you guys want to play that, and then we'll get some of the strings from that and flip it and see what we can do. Thank you. So, and now the remix. This is going to be brief, but basic idea is it's a conversation between generations and instruments. So, you guys ready? Yeah. All right.